I was born under the fierce sun that beats relentlessly over the Nile, in the city of Alexandria, jewel of knowledge, culture, and power. From the very beginning, I knew my life would be unlike any other woman's. I am Cleopatra Seventhia, Philopator, last of the Ptolemies, a dynasty born from conquest and ambition, rulers of Egypt for centuries. But to me, this title was not enough. I was destined for more. As a child, my world was a labyrinth of ancient scrolls, whispered secrets, and lessons from the wisest scholars of the age. My tutors taught me languages: Greek, Egyptian, Latin, and even the tongues of neighboring peoples, so that no corner of the world could hold a secret from me. I absorbed philosophy, mathematics, politics, and history with fierce hunger. I learned that knowledge was the greatest weapon of all. But Alexandria was not only a city of scholars and wonders, it was a battleground. The streets echoed with murmurs of dissent. The temples whispered stories of gods watching over fragile human power, and beyond the palace walls, my people struggled against poverty, war, and the looming threat of Roman expansion. My father, Ptolemy XII, was a ruler weighed down by enemies internal and external, and his reign teetered on the edge of collapse. I watched the fragile balance of power, understanding that strength alone would not preserve our dynasty. Cunning, alliances, and an iron will were essential. When I was just a teenager, my elder brother Ptolemy XIII was crowned king alongside me as ruler. But power was a dangerous game, especially with family. From the moment I stepped into the palace's gilded halls as queen, I faced threats, masked in smiles and silk. The court was a nest of vipers. Whispers of betrayal filled the air like poison. Learned quickly, to survive, I had to be cleverer, more persuasive, and bolder than anyone else. I used my intelligence and charm as weapons, my voice like honey, my gaze sharp as a serpent's. Every conversation, every meeting was a battlefield. I was not just fighting for the throne, I was fighting to protect Egypt's future. Rome was rising. Julius Caesar's shadow stretched across the Mediterranean. The once mighty Egyptian empire stood at a crossroads. My father had tried to placate Rome with bribes and diplomacy, but that was not enough. To protect my people, I would need to step into the heart of Rome's power itself. Yet, I also understood the limits of force. Egypt's survival depended on alliances, marriages, and political savvy. When my brother and I quarreled over control, I was forced into exile, only to return with the backing of powerful Roman forces. I did not merely seek to reclaim a throne, I sought to command the world's attention. My story is one of defiance against fate, against enemies, and even against my own family. I was more than a queen. I was a force of nature, intelligent, passionate, and unyielding. My reign would not be remembered for submission or silence. It would be a symphony of power, seduction, and revolution. For I was Cleopatra, and I was destined to change the world. After the bitter exile and the political upheaval within my own palace, I knew that brute force alone could never secure my reign over Egypt. The world was changing, and Rome was the new emperor of destiny. To safeguard my kingdom and expand my influence, I had to enter the heart of Roman power itself, and conquer it on its own terms. I was young, a queen yet unbowed, with the blood of generations running fierce through my veins. But Rome was not a kingdom to be ruled by brute strength or empty threats. It was a stage for cunning, seduction, and strategic alliances. I would learn this lesson well. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, pursuing his own civil war, I saw my chance. Here was a man who wielded power with an iron grip, but lacked the subtleties of diplomacy and knowledge of the East. I knew that to win him, I had to present myself not as a conquered prize, but as an equal, a queen with intellect, charm, and vision. Legend tells how I was smuggled into Caesar's chambers, rolled inside a carpet. Truth or myth, it symbolized the audacity I embodied. When I unrolled, meeting Caesar's eyes, I was not just a woman seeking protection. I was a ruler, demanding respect. Our alliance was forged not only in passion, but in mutual benefit. He recognized my value. Egypt's wealth and strategic location were key to his ambitions. Together, we quelled the rebellion led by my brother Ptolemy XIII, and I was restored to my rightful throne. But the battle for power was far from over. The court was a nest of vipers still hungry for influence, and Rome's gaze was as watchful as ever. Caesar's presence in Egypt changed everything. The political landscape shifted. with factions forming around us like predators circling their prey. I played the game masterfully, weaving diplomacy and deception into a tapestry that kept me in command. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, the Roman world plunged into chaos once again. The new players on the stage, Mark Antony, Octavian, and others vied for supremacy. For me, the choice was clear. I aligned myself with Mark Antony, a general whose passion and political acumen matched my own fire. Our relationship was more than an alliance of convenience, it was a fusion of ambition and desire. Together, we envisioned a realm stretching beyond Egypt, a world where our combined power would challenge Rome's very foundations. But our love was also a weapon and a target. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and rival, saw us as threats to Rome's future. Propaganda, betrayal, and war followed. I was not a mere pawn, but a queen who played her hand with audacity. I stood alongside Antony in battles, in political arenas, and in the halls of power. My voice was heard, my decisions decisive. Yet the price of power was steep. I faced betrayals, loss, and the weight of an empire on my shoulders. The Nile flowed endlessly as I fought, not just for my throne, but for the dignity of my people and the legacy I would leave. My story was no longer just Egyptian, it was woven into the destiny of the world. And I was ready to face whatever came next, undaunted and unyielding. The days following my alliance with Mark Antony were marked by a dazzling blend of triumph and tension. Our love was a force that rippled through empires, stirring hope and fear in equal measure. Together, we crafted a vision of power, a Rome reshaped by the strength of Egypt and the brilliance of our union. But beneath the gilded surface, shadows crept. The world of politics was a treacherous sea, and I, the Queen of the Nile, was its most cunning navigator. I learned that power was a delicate dance. One wrong step could unravel everything. Mark Antony was a warrior, passionate and relentless, but his heart often wrestled with his ambitions. His Roman allies eyed me with suspicion, questioning my influence over him, my foreignness, my ambition. They whispered that I was a seductress who used my charms to manipulate a great man, undermining Rome itself. I refused to be reduced to such a caricature. I was more than a woman's beauty. I was a ruler, a strategist, a queen with a destiny intertwined with empires. Our children, born of this union, were symbols of hope and continuity. I named them with care, honoring both my Egyptian heritage and our Roman alliance. Their futures were intertwined with the fate of two great worlds, yet the political storm intensified. Octavian, Caesar's heir, and Antony's rival, wove a web of propaganda to paint me as a foreign temptress bent on corrupting Rome's virtues. His words stirred fear and hatred, turning allies into enemies. The Senate, once indifferent, rallied against Antony, seeing his bond with me as a threat to Roman stability. War became inevitable. The Battle of Actium was the crucible where our fate was forged. Our fleet faced Octavian's forces in a desperate contest for survival. As the sun burned fiercely overhead, I stood upon the deck, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. But betrayal whispered in the winds. Antony's forces faltered. Rumors spread that he had abandoned the fight, leaving me and Egypt vulnerable. In the chaos, I refused to surrender. I commanded my ships with a queen's authority, urging my soldiers to fight not just for survival, but for honor. Yet the tide was merciless. Our defeat was crushing. Returning to Alexandria, the city once vibrant with hope now carried the weight of despair. The walls I had once commanded now felt like a prison. Antony, shattered by loss, withdrew into himself. Our love, once a beacon of power, now trembled under the shadow of fate. Enemies closed in. Octavian's forces advanced, demanding submission, but I would not yield. I summoned every ounce of courage, intelligence, and cunning left within me. If I could not hold the throne by force, I would hold it with legend. The tales of Cleopatra would not end in chains and humiliation. I vowed to make my exit as commanding and unforgettable as my reign. The walls of Alexandria, once vibrant with life and power, now seemed to close in like the shadows of doom itself. Our defeat at Actium had shattered more than just fleets. It had broken the spirits of men and the hopes of empires. Yet, even as Roman legions marched closer to the heart of my kingdom, I refused to let despair claim me. I was Cleopatra, the daughter of the Nile, the embodiment of a lineage steeped in fire and resilience. Our city was besieged not only by armies but by betrayal, whispers, and fear. The courtiers who had once danced at my feet now looked away, their loyalty faltering as Octavian's power grew. Yet I remained unyielding. I summoned my allies, fortified the walls, and prepared for the final act of this tragic play. Mark Antony, broken in body and spirit, clung to me in his darkest moments. His love was a fierce storm, but even storms fade. He was a warrior who had lost his battle, not just with Rome, but with the tides of fate. When news arrived that Octavian's forces were storming Alexandria's gates, Antony chose death over captivity. His final words, spoken with a voice both proud and defeated, were, for me, a testament to the bond that had defined us. I held him as life fled from his eyes, feeling the weight of loss settle upon my soul. The man who had been my partner in power was gone, and with him, the fragile hope of a new empire. Yet, my story was far from over. Octavian entered Alexandria with the arrogance of a conqueror. He sought to humiliate me, to parade me as a trophy of his victory, but I refused to be a prisoner of history's cruel whims. In a final act of defiance and control, one chose my own destiny. According to legend, I summoned a venomous asp, a symbol of royalty and divine power. As the serpent's bite coursed through my veins, I embraced the inevitable with the dignity of a queen who had ruled, not just with power but with passion and intellect. My death was meant to be a whisper of silence, but it became a roar across centuries. The world remembers me not just as a fallen queen, but as a woman who wielded her power unapologetically, who defied empires and carved her own legacy in stone and story. The aftermath, more than a legend. My children were spared Octavian's wrath, their futures secured in shadows and exile. My legacy passed on through whispers, paintings, and stories that would inspire generations to come. Cleopatra was more than the seductress Rome portrayed. I was a scholar, a politician, a mother, and a symbol of a culture that refused to be erased. In the halls of history, my name echoes a testament to the strength and complexity of a woman who dared to challenge the world's greatest power and almost rewrote its fate. I was the most powerful woman Egypt had ever known, and through triumph and tragedy, my story changed the world. The silence after Antony's death was louder than any war drum. I sat alone in the chamber where he had taken his last breath, his blood still staining the floor, my hands trembling not from fear but from fury. They believed I had been defeated, that love had made me weak, that with his death I would kneel. They misunderstood me entirely. I did not rise from the ashes of lovers, I created fire from ruin. The illusion of surrender. When Octavian entered Alexandria, he expected a broken woman, a queen shattered by grief. He was greeted instead by a goddess in human form. I wore the sacred robes of Isis, eyes lined in kohl, chin lifted like marble. He was a conqueror, but I, still, was a queen. He tried to charm me with promises of mercy. He offered safety for my children, leniency, even the illusion of shared governance. But I saw through it. He did not want an alliance, he wanted a trophy, a chained queen dragged through the streets of Rome to satisfy the pride of men. That would never be my ending. I played the last game. In the following days, I orchestrated my last political dance. I sent messages, leveraged debts, whispered promises. I tested his intentions and his patience. Every move was strategic. I wore my jewelry like armor, my perfume like poison, and my silence like a sword. My enemies watched me, thinking I was cornered, but I knew something they didn't. When a queen is caged, she doesn't cry, she chooses the moment to strike or disappear. The children of empire. I spent my final days with my children: Alexander, Helios, Cleopatra, Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. I kissed their foreheads and whispered stories of gods and stars, of honor and cunning, of fire that never dies. Even when the world grows cold, they would survive. I had made sure of it. I negotiated for their protection with my last remaining leverage, my legacy. They would live in exile, yes, but they would live. And my daughter Selene, I saw something in her. My will, my flame. My blood would not vanish, it would evolve, the final choice, in the heart of my private temple. With the sun bleeding into the horizon, I made my preparations. I summoned the asp, a sacred symbol of royalty and death. To others, it was suicide. To me, it was sovereignty. The final act of a woman who refused to be caged. I held the serpent gently. Its body was warm, pulsing with silent power. As its fangs pierced my skin, I did not scream. I smiled, because I knew I had chosen my ending. Immortal flame history may twist the tale. They may call me a temptress, a manipulator, a queen undone by love. Let them, but I know who I was. I was the most powerful woman in Egypt. I ruled not just with beauty, but with brilliance, with language, with war and peace in both hands. And long after empires crumble and names fade, mine will still be whispered by firelight and carved into stone. I am Cleopatra, and my story is far from over. I am gone, that at least, that's what they say, that the queen of Egypt fell, curled beside a snake, buried in linen and silence, that with my death, Egypt died too. But oh, how little they understand. A woman like EU doesn't vanish, she multiplies. The shadow over Rome. My death did not bring peace to Octavian, it brought him unease. He paraded his triumph through the streets of Rome with gold, captives, and banners, proclaiming Egypt's fall, but something lingered. My absence was louder than any cheer from the crowd. My name was spoken in whispers in Roman courts and kitchens alike. They feared me still, because I had become something more powerful than a living queen. I had become a myth. The fate of my children were sent to Rome, far from the sands that birthed them. I had bargained with the last thread of my breath to protect them. Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus, my sons, were quieted by the tides of history, lost, forgotten. But my daughter, Cleopatra Selene, Selene, she carried my blood, like a sword beneath silk raised among strangers, surrounded by enemies. Yet she watched, she learned, she would not rule Egypt, but she would reign nonetheless, in other lands, with other crowns, under a different sky. I knew, when I looked into her eyes, that final time, that my legacy would not end with me, it would burn again. Through her, the desert whispers back in Alexandria. They tried to erase me. Octavian, now Augustus, sealed the temples. He melted my statues, renamed my palaces, rewrote my story in Roman ink. He wanted me remembered only as his victory, but even as the official records twisted my truth, the people remembered. They spoke of the queen who walked among gods, the woman who debated philosophers and seduced emperors, the mother of empires, the last true ruler of the Nile. And in the silence of the desert winds, in the sacred halls of ruined temples, my name echoed still. Cle-o-pa-tra. Flame Rome couldn't extinguish. What Augustus didn't understand was this: power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wears memory. Sometimes it becomes legend. They feared my mind more than my armies, my voice more than my navy, my ambition more than any war machine Rome had ever forged. They feared what I represented: a woman who refused to ask permission, a ruler who chose her fate, a queen who died on her own terms. More than a queen, I was never merely a lover of powerful men. I was their equal. I challenged them. I inspired them. And I outlasted them in memory. Caesar was assassinated. Antony died by his own blade. Octavian became emperor, but I became immortal. Because while they ruled with laws and weapons, I ruled with legacy. I was Cleopatra. And while the world thought I had vanished into dust, I had only begun to rise. Centuries have passed since I closed my eyes for the last time, but no one has ever buried my name. My body may have been lost to the sands of Egypt, but my soul, my soul, scattered like a storm across the civilizations that followed. They tried to erase my face from statues, but others carved it again in marble. They twisted my story in scrolls, but women retold it with their own voices, louder, braver, truer. When legend replaces flesh over time, I ceased to be just Cleopatra, queen of Egypt. I became a symbol, the woman who faced Rome, the lover of two emperors, the ruler who defied the world, and truth, a truth blended with myth. They said I tamed serpents with my stare, that I spoke to gods as their equal, that I turned alliances into jewels and enemies into poetry that asked, was it beauty, or was it power? I smiled from beyond. It was both, and more. Queen of art and imagination, poets sang me in sonnets. Painters brushed me in oil and gold. Actresses wore my name in theaters and on screens, with lined eyes and blazing hearts. I became tragedy for Shakespeare, mystery for Hollywood, fascination for the world. From flesh, I became muse. From ruler, I became idea, and ideas, well, They never die. In the blood of the women, after Maine, every woman who refuses to be silenced. In every leader who defies the logic of the world. In every mother who guards her child with claws and fire, I am there. My name is whispered by girls. In every language, my face reemerges in books, in murals, in memory. My courage lives in voices that demand freedom. Cleopatra became more than a woman. She became a spark. The cost of being remembered, but don't be fooled. To be remembered comes at a price. I lost my throne. I lost my loves. I was betrayed, hunted, erased, but I chose my death, and in doing so, I chose my eternity. Because when the world tries to control a woman, and she answers with power, passion, and brilliance, she no longer belongs. She becomes legend. She becomes revolution. I am Cleopatra, the one they tried to silence, the one time could never forget. And the world is still learning how to deal with what I represent. From beyond the veil of history, I watch. Centuries have turned into dust. Empires have risen and crumbled, and still, nothing has changed as much as they think. The names are different. The crowns have become titles. The swords have become laws. But the struggle for power, for voice, for identity, for legacy, that never faded. I see myself in today's queens, in the women who take the podiums. I see echoes of my defiance. They wear suits instead of robes, microphones instead of crowns, but their voices shake the world the way mine once did in courtrooms and temples. They are questioned, doubted, labeled, challenged not for their ideas, but for their gender, their beauty, their audacity. And I smile, because every time a woman refuses to yield, refuses to speak softly just to be liked, I know my story is still breathing in her blood. The world still fears a powerful woman. They may not use ASPs or Roman legions anymore, but they still try to bring women down with venom, this time through whispers, headlines, ridicule. When a woman rises to power, they ask, who did she sleep with to get there? How long before she collapses? Can she be trusted? They said the same of me. They claimed I used seduction, not strategy, that I was more lover than leader. But my scrolls were filled with statecraft, my letters with language and leverage. I did what every ruler had done. I simply did it as a woman. And that was enough to make the world tremble. The same old Rome, wearing new masks. I look at modern empires, governments, corporations, nations claiming progress, and I see the same Roman hunger behind their masks: conquest, greed, the lust to erase the voices that threaten control. Octavian has many descendants. They write the history books. They decide what is noble, what is dangerous, what is feminine enough to be accepted. But here's the truth. They've never been able to control a woman who writes her own story. I am still here when protests rise, and women chant in unison, when queens are born in boardrooms, classrooms, and slums, when girls dare to say, I will not bow. I am there, not in flesh, not in gold, but in the whisper of rebellion that curls behind every fearless gaze. My life may have ended with poison and silk, but my spirit is fire, a warning to the world. Remember this: you can kill a queen, but you can't kill what she stood for. You can mock her, but you can't mute her legacy. You can try to forget her, but she'll keep returning in dreams, in uprisings, in the unbreakable will of every woman told she should stay quiet. I am Cleopatra, and I am watching, from your museums, from your screens, from your daughter's eyes. And I will not rest until the world stops fearing power when it wears a woman's face. Power. They chased it like it was water in the desert, fought wars for it, killed for it, sold their souls for it, but few ever understood what true power really is. They believed power was about thrones, borders, armies. They measured it in gold and blood. They worshipped the loudest voices, the biggest victories, the sharpest weapons. But I knew better, because I lost at Alon Papas, and still, I am remembered. What they called power was only control. Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. He controlled the map, the armies, the law, but not the narrative. He ruled the world, but I owned the story. What terrified him most was not my ships, nor my lovers, but the fact that people might remember me as more than his conquered queen. And they did. Memory is the real throne, you see. History is not written in stone, it's written in whispers, in the hearts of those who live after us. And it can be reshaped, reclaimed, resurrected. Statues crumble, crowns rust, But a story, a true story, can survive empires. They tried to rewrite me as a cautionary tale, a fallen woman, a dangerous seductress, a foreign threat, but women saw the cracks in their version. They pieced me back together, not as Rome's caricature, but as Egypt's storm, the price I paid for immortality. Do you think I didn't know what was coming? That I, who studied stars and dynasties, who spoke 9 languages and debated philosophers, was unaware of what my end would look like. I knew, I chose it anyway, because sometimes the most powerful act is not clinging to the crown, but letting go and forcing the world to remember why they feared you. I didn't die for love, I died for control, for dignity, for the right to end my story. Instead of letting Rome write the final chapter, time cannot touch me. The centuries have tried to sand me down, to make me more palatable, more romantic, more tragic. But I am none of those things. I am fire. I am strategy. I am a symbol of what a woman becomes when she refuses to be only what the world permits. And now, I live beyond time, beyond borders, in the lines of poetry, in the cries of revolution, in the dreams of every girl who wonders if she can rise against the odds. Yes, she can. I did. I am not a ghost. I am a flame. So ask yourselves, why does my name still make people stop and stare? Why are they still making films about me, writing novels, arguing over every detail of my life? Because I did not live quietly, and I did not die begging. I lived with fury, and I died with purpose. And that, in the end, is what makes a legacy. I am Cleopatra, Queen of the Nile, daughter of war and wisdom, lover of kings, and rival of empires. And, though I walked this earth only once, I am still here. You followed my voice through sand and storm, through gold and betrayal, through thrones and serpents. Now listen closely, because this is not a farewell. This is a warning, and a promise. I never belonged to a tomb. They searched for my final resting place for centuries, as if finding my bones would grant them power over my legend, as if locating my skull could let them measure the shape of my ambition. Fools, don't they know? I was never buried. I became the Nile, the thunder in desert winds, the unspoken courage behind a woman's first no. I am etched in mirrors, in eyes that dare to look back. I am not in the earth. I am in the world. But they should have feared. They feared my body, feared that it could command kings, feared that it could birth rivals, feared that it could rule without permission. But what they should have feared was my mind, my intellect, my foresight, my audacity to speak in rooms where women were only meant to listen. That was my true empire, not the marble palaces, but the idea that a woman could wield the world and not apologize. The future still needs me. You want to know why I still matter? Because we are not done. Because the world still trembles when a woman refuses to be polite, when she speaks first, when she chooses war, when she chooses peace, when she dares to love without shame, or rule without guilt, and when she writes her own ending. They teach history like I was the last of my kind, but I was the first of a new breed, not a victim, not a pawn, but a force, the eternal queen. They will say I was myth. They will say I was monstrous. They will say I was magnificent. Let them say it all, because I was never meant to be one thing. I was woman and goddess, mother and monarch, temptress and tactician, flesh and flame. I shattered the mold they wrote for me, and every time they tried to put me back in it, I returned more powerful. So here is my final truth. I was not born to fade. I was not born to please. I was not born to follow. I was born to burn. And though Rome took my empire, I took the world. I am Cleopatra, and now, so are you.